Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the LFS podcast with me, Kevin Ferris. This week on the show, Tottenham sack another manager as Christian Stellini is dismissed following 6-1 defeat to Newcastle. And will Mauricio Pochettino make a return to London as Chelsea manager? While Todd Bowley is in talks with the former Spurs manager for the top job at Stamford Bridge. Plus, all you need to know ahead of the biggest game of the season as Manchester City host Arsenal in the fight for the title in midweek action in the Premier League. All of that and more to come on this week's LFS podcast. A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the LFS podcast. We have a few news stories to start for you, but the main part of today's show is talking about that huge game in the Premier League coming up tomorrow, Manchester City against Arsenal in the Premier League to decide who is going to lift that trophy at the end of May. And we're going to talk in real detail on what the permutations could be, what Arsenal need to do to really keep that gap ahead of City. And we'll talk about the upcoming fixtures as well after this game in any such situation. But first, let's get to this week's news. And yesterday, or Monday, as you're listening to this, interim manager Christian Stellini was sacked by Tottenham after 4 matches in charge. The decision comes a day after Spurs were thrashed 6-1 at Newcastle, a performance chairman Daniel Levy has described as wholly unacceptable. Stellini was appointed on the 26th of March after Antonio Conte's 16-month spell as Spurs boss came to an end. Well, Ryan Mason, who worked under Stellini and took charge when Jose Mourinho was sacked in 2021, succeeds him. Sunday's defeat at Newcastle, where they trailed 5-0 after 21 minutes, was a significant blow to Spurs' hopes of securing Champions League qualification. In a statement, owner Daniel Levy said, "It was devastating to see. We can look at many reasons why it happened and why myself, the board, the coaches and players must all take collective responsibility. Ultimately, the responsibility is mine." Well, Spurs, it's the merry-go-round of managers really at this point in the Premier League. Christian Stellini becomes number 13 or 14 of the season. It's still a Premier League record. It's a crazy number of sackings, although he was only the interim manager at Spurs. He also found a way for Spurs to sack him. Of course, it was an absolutely dreadful performance at Newcastle, down 5-0 after 21 minutes is beyond belief, really. And as Daniel Levy put it, wholly unacceptable. But the key thing that I took before Christian Stellini was sacked, on Monday morning, you heard the Spurs fans saying that enough was enough. Yes, Stellini needed to go because his tactics weren't working and the way he was playing football wasn't helping the club. But also at the same time, it's not just about the manager, it's the hierarchy of Spurs that is the big problem at the minute. It's the ownership. The ambition of the football club is what people are saying is the real problem, not just managerial. And you could argue that at a good few football clubs around the country, around the Premier League as well, that aren't in the positions that they want to be. Speaking of teams that aren't where they want to be, Chelsea, and they're on the search for their new permanent manager, and they're in advanced talks to make former Tottenham boss Mauricio Pochettino their new manager. The Argentinian's most recent job was PSG, is keen on the role, but more negotiations will take place before any deal is finalised. Chelsea want a quick resolution and believe they are at the end of the process as they search for a permanent replacement for Graham Potter. Pochettino would take over from interim manager Frank Lampard. Well, the former England midfielder took charge of the Blues after they sacked Potter at the start of April, but has lost all 4 of his games in charge. It is not yet known whether Pochettino, who has been out of work since PSG, who sacked him in July 2022, will take over immediately, or whether Lampard will stay on as planned until the end of the season. However, the Argentine said that no to an initial approach from Chelsea, but now the club are happy to hand him more control as he looks for a job that allows him to have input and impact beyond selecting the first team. Chelsea have held talks with former Bayern Munich boss Julian Nagelsmann before he fell out of the running. Of course, Luis Enrique was amongst one of the contenders. Vincent Kompany, of course, in the mix to be the next Chelsea boss. But It looks like Mauricio Pochettino will be the man to take over the club, and it's just awaiting a full confirmation of that and what that really will mean, because of course Frank Lampard, interim control, 4 games in charge, lost all 4 of them. Yes, 2 of them were to Real Madrid, but the other 2 were Premier League games against Wolves and Brighton. The Brighton game, although you were at home, still a tough game. Wolves his first game in charge. So there are excuses for Frank Lampard, but at the end of the day, it's still not good enough to lose 4 straight games and really show very little intent of really doing very much, in terms of attacking areas. That's what I said whenever I said on this very podcast when Frank Lampard was appointed that he will look to give them a more attacking threat. We've not seen that at all. We know with Frank Lampard, defensively that's not been the problem for Chelsea. It's the attacking wise, and it's a tough task, and he hasn't yet conquered it. Whether he will conquer it before the end of the season is beyond me, because we just not long heard that Reece James will miss the remainder of the season. He's out with injury. Frank Lampard has just done his pre-match press conference for the midweek games, and it doesn't look good for Chelsea at the minute. Where they are going to finish up, it doesn't get any easier for them towards the end of the season anyway. So we will wait and see what happens there, but who knows how Chelsea are going to finish their season under Frank Lampard. So those are our situational stories of the week and our news of the week. We're going to move on to the big topic of this podcast. As you can see on the strap there, Manchester City versus Arsenal preview. We're going to talk all the way through the game. What's going to happen, who's going to be there, who might start, and what are the effects of every possible result out of this game. Right then, let's get into this topic then. It's the fight for the title at the Etihad on Wednesday night in the Premier League. Wednesday, 8 o'clock, live here on LFS, live commentary and live play-by-play, plus all the permutations and live tables, everything you need we will have on that game, plus all the midweek games here on LFS to decide this crazy end to another fantastic Premier League season. But here we go. Manchester City against Arsenal then. It's first against second. And Manchester City 5 points behind Arsenal prior to kick-off. City do have 2 games in hand. If they win those 2 games in hand, forgetting about this game, they will be at 1 point ahead of Arsenal. Arsenal have drawn all of their last 3 Premier League games against Liverpool, West Ham and Southampton. City have won all of their last 5 Premier League games, and that's what puts them in the position that they are in. City also have a better goal difference of plus 50 to Arsenal's plus 43. So there is a big gap there in terms of goal difference as well from City's point of view. But I do think it's not going to be an easy game, an easy turnover for City. Although they do have a great record against Arsenal. Arsenal haven't won again away at City or won against City in the league since December 2015. And remember, the last time these two met at the Etihad was back at the start of last season when Arsenal were bottom of the table in the Premier League and lost by 5-0 on that day. Could have been a lot worse. But I think let's just get into this then, and I'll tell you exactly what the permutations will be. So if Manchester City win against Arsenal, they will be 2 points behind them with 2 games in hand. They win those 2 games in hand, and they will be 4 points ahead of Arsenal at the top of the table, Manchester City, if they win those games in hand, and they will be on the same number of games. A draw would keep, of course, the 2 teams 5 points apart, and would leave us where we are, with the possibility of City going just a point ahead of Arsenal when they've both played the same number of games, if City win both their games in hand. If Arsenal win, they will be 8 points clear of City, with City having to play 2 games fewer, and that means that the best position, if City even win their 2 games in hand, with Arsenal winning at the Etihad, would mean that City would only be 2 points behind Arsenal, but both teams will have played the same number of games. The question is, though, are Arsenal are they really capable of doing it? away at Manchester City. Arsenal's away record this season, they've dropped points 5 times away from home this season, 11 wins out of 16. They've drawn both of their last 2 away games by 2-2. They won 3-0 away at Fulham prior to that, 1-0 away at Leicester prior to that, and 4-2 away at Aston Villa prior to that. So that's 3 of their last 5 away games. They've conceded 2 goals, Arsenal. Manchester City, in terms of their home form, they have the best home form in the league. 15 games played, 13 wins, and won all of their last 5 home games. 3-1 against Leicester, 4-1 against Liverpool, 2-0 against Newcastle, 3-1 against Aston Villa, and 3-0 against Wolves. That's 40 points from 15 home games. They've scored 50 goals and only conceded 15 goals at home this season, which is pretty good in terms of home records for Manchester City in terms of that. So when you think of it, on the balance of play, City have only lost 1 home game this season, and Arsenal don't have that bad an away record, the best away record in the league, but it's still a bit wobbly. And when you're getting into City, you cannot be wobbly, you cannot be under easy threat, considering Arsenal have conceded 7 goals in their last 3 games. Yes, they've scored 7 goals in their last 3 games, but that's irrelevant. Conceding 7, the big question and the big point that's being made is the miss of William Saliba at the back. You know, has been so important for Arsenal's defensive play this season. William Saliba, and how good they were at keeping clean sheets and holding teams off. And when they weren't able to do that, they kept the score that down that low, that they didn't lose games. They didn't drop points. They had enough going forward that they could concede 1 or 2 goals and still be able to do it. Where it's evening out now. We've seen that in the last 3 games. They're not scoring as many as they're conceding, if you know what I mean. They're conceding more than they are scoring, which isn't good enough for Arsenal, but maybe their tough patch is coming at the exact wrong time of the season. You know, we've seen City have had a rough patch this season. Every team has the rough patch. Arsenal, we're yet to see them really stumble. And we've seen them in the last 3 games really possibly stumbling. Now, they would hope that those 3 games are the end of that, and they can bounce back in this City game and really get a good result out of it. Because I don't think a draw away at City would be terrible for Arsenal, although it would give the chance for City, if they win their 2 games in hand, to go above them. I don't think it would be crazily terrible. The reason I say that is because, yes, City have won 5 of the last 5, but I don't think City are going to go at 13 out of 13 before the end of the season. And I'm going to talk about their fixtures. I'm going to go to City first. I was going to go to Arsenal, but seeing I'm talking about City, City have got away to Fulham on Sunday, then home to West Ham, home to Leeds, away to Everton, home to Chelsea, away to Brighton, and away to Brentford before the end of the season. Pinpointing, then, Fulham have very little to play for. That should be 3 points. West Ham, at this moment in time, have very little to play for, plus they're at home. They have Leeds at home, which should be a winner, but again, Leeds in the relegation fight, you never know. Everton at Goodison Park will be one of the toughest tests for City. Very hostile atmosphere, and a team looking to save their season, looking to stay in the Premier League. They've done it last season under Frank Lampard. Everton really got that Goodison crowd behind them and pulled out some miraculous results towards the end of the season. They've got Chelsea at home. Chelsea seemingly quite a soft underbelly, pretty easy to beat at the minute, but you never know. Chelsea, they could have their day. Brighton away is not an easy game whatsoever. Brighton, pretty amazing what Roberto De Zerbi is doing, plus they're on the fight for Europe, so they've got something to play for. Plus Brentford, they're maybe out of that European conversation, but they'll want to give their home crowd a pretty good end of the season on that final day. So although City have games, very much winnable games towards the end of the season, if it comes down to that they draw this game against Arsenal and win those 2 games in hand, but they drop points in, say, one of the games that they shouldn't be. They can't afford to drop points if Arsenal keep winning. And that's where the pressure comes. But City have dealt with this before. They know how to deal with these types of pressure situations in title races, and it'll be fascinating to see tonight, as you're watching this tonight, how they deal with that, and how Arsenal deal with that as well, because Arsenal don't have that easy run of fixtures either. They play this game, then they next Tuesday, the 2nd of May, they host Chelsea, and away to Newcastle, home to Brighton, away to Forest, and home to Wolves. Out of those remaining 5 games after the City game, there are probably, I'd say, 2 games in there where both teams have not, well, the opposition for Arsenal have nothing to play for. That's Wolves and Chelsea. Both home games should be winnable games at home. The 3 games in the middle of that, Newcastle away, Brighton at home, and Forest away, are not going to be easy games. Newcastle away will be tough. Very, very tough. Newcastle have an amazing home record this season. You know, they've only lost once at St James's Park, and that was to Liverpool back in February. So it's not going to be easy to go to Newcastle and get 3 points. Then they've got Brighton at home. Brighton, as I said, will be fighting for Europe and have the 4th best away record of the league. 25 points in 15 games for Brighton away from home this season. So it's not going to be easy, that game. And we can see what Arsenal can do at the Emirates. They have slipped up previously. And then Forest away. Although Forest don't have that great a home record, it's much better than their away record, let's be honest. But Forest in a relegation fight, and will be probably fighting for their lives at that point. The second last game of the season. They possibly could be down by that point, Forest. You never know, depending on what way the relegation battle goes. But that could be their last opportunity for us to pick up points if it goes that tight. And Arsenal could be under real pressure in that one as well. So their upcoming fixtures for both teams aren't bankable 3-pointers. We've seen these teams, they can slip up in games, they can drop points. It's not that type of the level that we've seen in the last few years of Manchester City, where they're completely ruthless, game after game after game after game, just completely dominating sides. Although we're starting to maybe see that coming through, the likes of the way we see with Real Madrid, usually towards the end of seasons, that similar trait. They start the season pretty weird. They're not in kicking gear, and then when it gets to March, April time, they just kick into gear, they get on the horse, and they just go and destroy teams every single week. That similar trait that we see with Real Madrid, I think we're seeing with Manchester City, but it's a different task for Manchester City. They're catching up. They're trying to catch the team above them. And it always comes down to games in hand. And who has the games in hand? Who has the opportunities to make it? And I think it comes back to that big question that everybody always asks. Would you rather points on the board or have games in hand? And I think it comes down to that for City. Would they rather be already a point ahead of Arsenal going into this game, thinking we can keep this lead? Or would they rather be in a position where they know if they get a good result out of this, they can still be above Arsenal if they take their opportunities in those 2 games in hand? And that's where the exciting story comes, those 2 games in hand. And for Manchester City, it'll be interesting to see what way they navigate those, because obviously everything is being bunched into a very tight schedule before the end of the season. Arsenal play 5 games in May. I think Manchester City would play 6 or 7 in May. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 games in May. 6 games in May. 1 on the 30th of April. But you can see what I mean. In that tight period of time, they play such an abundance of games. Plus they have the semi-finals of the Champions League. Plus they have the FA Cup final to come after that. It's going to be a very tight schedule for City, and that's going to add to the pressure of them to try and win this Premier League title, is that they have the Champions League in their way, and they have other things to be focusing on as well, whereas Arsenal don't have that. Arsenal have literally nothing else to play for at the minute, other than this league title, and that will be another interesting point, whether City can also overcome Real Madrid in the Champions League semi-finals, and also keep the momentum in the title race to keep it going their way before the end of the season. And that's why I say it's such an interesting thing. Would they rather have the points on the board or the games in hand? Because games in hand, it puts more pressure on you. But the points on the board, you also still have that pressure of having to maintain the results every single week. And that is where it gets interesting and where it will get exciting from here on in, whether or not Man City and Arsenal will be able to do so. And that's where it gets exciting. But also, this game will be a blockbuster fixture. It will be one that I think a draw would help neither team, really, although it might help both. That kind of scenario. Depending on what way other games go, a draw might help, but also both teams will want to go for the win. Arsenal winless in 3, drawn their last 3 games, and City want to take this opportunity at home against the league leaders. They will want to do it. And that's where it gets so exciting. Right then, that's it. That is us. I really hope you enjoy the Manchester City Arsenal game. I'll be doing the commentary on that one tonight on LFS. If you want to tune in for that one, we'll be doing all of that for you. And don't forget to follow us on social media as well, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok at LFStreams2 on all of those platforms to keep following us, keep up to date with everything that we're doing here on LFS. But for me this week, it's a big look ahead to this huge game, the fight for the title here on LFS. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with another LFS podcast in a week's time.